Hello everyone, Giltar here with an action figure review. This time we'll be looking at Transformers Alternity Bumble Champion Yellow. Now this will be a 4-part review in which part 1 will cover the vehicle mode details, the packaging details, and some information about the Alternity toy line. In part 2 I'll cover the transformation process from vehicle mode or alt mode to robot mode, and then part 3 I'll cover the articulation of the robot mode. And then in part 4, I'll finally cover the pros, cons, and my final thoughts on this action figure. Now, Alternity Bumble was released in November of 2009 for 4,500 yen, or basically $48 or so at current conversion rates, and that's dollars as in US dollars. Now, as far as Alternity as a toy line, it's actually the sort of spiritual successor or sequel to a previous toy line called Binaltech. Takara Tomy, which made Binaltech and is making Alternity, Takara Tomy made Binaltech in 2005, and the basic premise behind that toy line was that it would offer toys that had vehicle modes that were of licensed vehicle design. So every vehicle mode was of a licensed vehicle. They were essentially toy replicas of cars and trucks and jeeps. They would all be 1:24 scale, and they would all contain die-cast metal content. And they were basically, they were made to be a high-end action figure or high-end toy product line. Now Hasbro adapted the Binaltech line and came out with their own version called Alternators. They used the same toy molds, reproduced the figures, but the one difference was that they omitted the die-cast content and replaced it with plastic content. So the Alternators toys were all purely plastic. I have quite a few Alternators toys, and I think they're great. And they're much more affordable than the Binaltech figures, especially now, which is a few years after the Alternators, or rather Binaltech line stopped production. And now getting back to Alternity, it has a similar premise to Binaltech in that these are high-end action figures. They have die-cast metal content, and they are all in a certain size scale. Now, rather than being 1:24 scale, Alternity figures, I believe, are 1:32 scale, so they are smaller. In vehicle and robot modes, Alternity figures are pretty much the equivalent of a deluxe class Transformers toy. So they're not that big, and that is one issue some people have with these figures, because they're very expensive, and a lot of people have this this feeling that if you're going to be paying so much money for something, you should get something a little more physically substantial. But I'll get into that later on. So that's a basic rundown of the Alternity history and its connection to Binaltech. One thing about the Alternity fiction, though, the background story, is that it's very super science, pseudo-science, very over the top. It really reminds me of things like, if any of you guys have read Masamune Shirow's manga work, one story sticks out to me in particular that sort of connects to Alternity, which is Orion. And the thing is, in Orion, it had a lot of sort of pseudo-science, quantum physics mixed in with magic, and it was really just a lot of techno magic babble going on, and that's what kind of I guess Alternity is like. So actually I'll get into that in a moment here. I'm just going to move these model kits back because I sort of have them here for size comparison. If you want to get an idea of how small Bumble is, you can see that it's quite short. It's about maybe 2 and maybe 2.5 inches tall compared. And I also have Legends Bumblebee here, but here's the packaging for the Alternity Bumble figure with really nice artwork here on the front. Open shell packaging, and it's all plastic, as you can see. And I really like this presentation because it makes very efficient use of space. The packaging itself, just like with a lot of the Japanese product packaging, I really like. For example, Bandai's packaging of Robot Damashi and SH Figuarts figures. I really like those packaging schemes because they make efficient use of space, and they make great display pieces if you want to keep your figures inside for display on the shelf. Now with the Alternity figures, they all come in this sort of shell here that you just pull out once you open up the covers. And in the center, normally you get instructions on the bottom of the box here. They slide out. But here's just the main sort of shell for the vehicle mode, which all the Alternity figures, they come as vehicles and you have to transform them out. But all you do is just separate these tabs and you fold it out, and it's just it's a really clean, good-looking presentation. I really like this approach to packaging the Alternity figures. And on the back here, you'll see an opening here with basically the outline of the Autobot or Cybertron symbol. In Japanese, it was Cybertron versus Destron. In America, it's Autobots versus Decepticon. So I really love the Alternity packaging design. I think it's great, and as usual, like I've said before, I really enjoy the Japanese approach to packaging their figures. Now, next up, in the instruction booklet, I don't know if you guys can make it out because it's a pretty big thing here, but there's a fold-out of the instructions. Now, on one side of this instruction sheet, you basically get the transformation steps, which is all fine and dandy. But on the back here, which is something I really like, is a lot of information. On the right side, we have this short story detailing some exploits of Bumble, and I think Alita 7. Information about the Suzuki Swift Sport car and whatever else going on there. And then on the left side, we have more sort of G1 or Generation 1 styled information. We have like this grid background with line art of Bumble and a bunch of basically tech specs. And down here we have some stats, information about Trickster / Bumble, and some information here about the various parts of Bumble. And why that's important is that in Alternity, where I mentioned earlier we had a whole bunch of pseudoscience stuff, Alternity is basically this sort of over-the-top super-powered Transformers version universe where all these different characters have these things called auto avatars, which are souped up interdimensional physics warping mechanical bodies, and all these different points on the sheet are pointing out different parts of Bumble. So let me just read some of this stuff off. My source is tfwiki.net, but at the top of the head, it's the pan-dimensional sensory system. It's described as a superdimensional information receptor centered on the horns of his head, capable of detailed sorting and recognition of the complex structure of multiple worlds. Next up is the clavicle, which is the Alternium hyper frame, which physically links the auto avatar and Alternity frame, a terminal for higher dimensional matter. Next up is the chronovenom stinger, or pistols or guns, which fires unique particle projectiles which paralyze the local flow of time, stopping the motion of objects. Next up in the forearms are the time paradox decryptor component, or components, device capable of completing and dismantling minor paradoxes. I mean, just think about this. This is just some crazy science stuff. It's not even real science. It's just a bunch of, I don't know, like just stuff thrown together. Next up in the abdomen, there's a component called the reverse entropic damage control. It's a device that nullifies personal or material losses resulting from dimensional interference. And finally, in the feet or foot is the Timaeus power track generator, which generates a run loop for the Timaeus drive super dimensional driver. I mean, this is just really like far out stuff, and again, if you guys have ever read Orion by Masamune Shirow, all this seems very familiar, because like in Orion, it was just like all this sort of mixed magic quantum physics stuff going on, and about like karma and particles and molecules and all this other stuff. But anyways, I really enjoy that aspect of Alternity. It's just so over the top and something so unique, as far as I know, in Transformers fiction, that I just really like it. Now, as far as the alternate mode of Bumble here, and it's a fully functional car toy. It seems silly to some people to mention that it rolls, but never underestimate the functionality of toys. And there are times when you'll get toys which, they're cars or vehicles, but they literally cannot roll, which is kind of funny. Now, one of the things about Alternity and Vinyl Tech was that they're supposed to be almost like vehicle replicas. So they do have functionality in that it has opening front and back doors, an opening hatch for the trunk, an opening hood as well. If I can get it out here, I just need longer fingernails. Actually, I'll just bring it back to do it. But yeah, it has all these different sort of structural details that are meant to bring this toy closer to the level of a vehicle toy replica. And it's just really impressive. Even on here, there's a faux or fake engine block. which is actually a component that sort of clips into place to secure the vehicle mode. Inside, I don't know if you can make it out, but on the driver's side, as this is a Japanese car, there's a steering wheel that actually turns a bit. The interior is pretty good. You actually have front and back seats. And I apologize for the poor quality of my camera here and just these bad angles, but take my word for it, the interiors are actually pretty decent, though you can kind of make out Bumble's head here in the back, so you've got some robot kibble going on. And on the bottom, and I have to mention now, for anybody who isn't aware, kibble is just basically a term that refers to sort of obtrusive parts that don't make sense in a particular mode. So when you're in robot mode, obtrusive vehicle parts that don't serve a purpose, that's kibble. Or in vehicle mode, when you see obvious robot parts, that's kibble too, if they don't serve a purpose. And on the bottom, it's not the greatest. I mean, you can see the back of Bumble's head. You see a pretty big gap here under where the engine would be. So aside from that, though, it's a really nicely detailed vehicle mode, and really at a glance, I think it would convince most people that this is a vehicle replica rather than a Transformers toy. So I really do like this. And I think it's just, some really great detailing. It really helps that it is a licensed design. So that does it for part 1 of the review. I'll be back in part 2 going over the transformation. Thanks for watching so far, and I'll see you at part 2.